I completely messed up the first thing I was asked to do, which was The Dark Knight Rises. I remember it pretty well. It went dun, ga dun, dun, like My Jamaican Guy. It was dun, 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 3, 4, 1, mute. He heard the title and said that would work really well for Grace Jones. So Macca's playing guitar, Trevor's playing keyboard, I'm playing bass and rhythm. You know, the veins are coming out on your forehead. Try that. So she did that, and it worked really well. There is that thing about contracts. A good contract is one where neither party's happy. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we looped a section of the drums where the guitar player had gone off to have a pee. We'd argue a lot. We argued a lot. I haven't pass. And with Hans, when I met him, I made a jokingly disparaging remark about something. I can't really go, oh, that's amazing, because I don't know what I'm hearing. I need to hear it a few times. And the three of us spontaneously burst into floods of tears. It was the weirdest moment, because it sounded so great and had taken so long to get to this point. And she sang it. It was just amazing.
That's Stephen Lipson, and he's worked with some amazing people in his career. Started off with Sniff and the Tears, built his own studio. He's worked with Annie Lennox, some great stories about her. Trevor Horn, of course, on Propaganda, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. He's worked with Grace Jones, and his career didn't sort of end in that period because he now works in films with Hans Zimmer. So stick with this interview. It's an hour long, but there's some really fascinating anecdotes, particularly when we come towards the end. So here he is, Stephen Lipson. So Steve Lipson, welcome. Obviously later on, I'm going to talk about, some of these most amazing tracks that you've worked on, and also your film work. But I want to start really about your family life and what sort of cultural background you were brought up in as a young child. Did you have one at all?
A childhood?
No, we had a childhood, but whether your parents were very culturally aware or they gave
No, not really. Middle class Jewish family in North London. Very stereotypical. Music was not a thing. My dad I think he had a trad jazz record that he listened to.
One
trad jazz record. And I seem to remember things like Gigi, The King and I, these funny musicals I seem to remember, but of no import at all, really. But my brother, at about the age of 13 or 14, decided he was going to be a drummer. And he was always into music, and he's 5 years older than me. So I sort of grabbed onto his shirt tails, as it were, and got dragged along, learning to drum. And then at the age of 8, I don't know quite, I think on holiday somewhere, my parents bought me a £5 acoustic guitar or something.
I mean, they're quite brave when they I presume they bought a drum kit for your brother.
I don't know how he got a drum kit, but he used to play in his bedroom, much to my mother's dismay, of course. And the end result being he moved out of home as soon as he could. 16 or 17, he'd gone.
So what attracted you to the guitar? What was the reason that you wanted to play a guitar?
I haven't got a clue. Maybe because that was the thing. Maybe I know the first record I learnt on the guitar was "You Really Got Me" by the Kinks, and the only way I could play it was with a kitchen knife. I made indentations at the top of the fretboard, so I knew where to play the one string. It was rubbish, really. And then my cousin, who was much the same age as me, he got a drum kit as well. He lived in Kensington, which became my sort of go-to place. And I'd take my acoustic guitar along. And I seem to remember buying a pickup and wiring it to a gramophone so I could hear it. It was hokey beyond belief.
I mean, we're a similar generation, and I remember, and I was brought up in Chelmsford, which is, you know, northeast of London, and I remember, like, at school, how much of an importance music was as a young kid. You know what I mean? It meant everything, and that you were, you know, you were fans of certain people, and it just seemed something so important at that young age. Was that also part of the reason that you would eventually move into a career in music, that it had some massive importance to you as a child?
Music was really important. It was part of our psyche. It was part of our my growing up years. Is that why I went into music? Do you know I didn't go into music? What all that happened was I ended up in a bedroom band, if that means anything to you. We just played in the bedroom with headphones and a drum box, one of those very primitive Roland drum box. Could it have been a CR78 or something? You know, a really ancient, the very first drum box, basically. And at the age of 13 or 14, I got a Revox. So it was just sort of inquiring mind. So I never went into music. I was just playing. And then I got better at playing, and our little bedroom band got really good. And then I started doing sessions for a friend who had a jingles company. And that turned into me saying to him, oh, in the meantime, my bedroom band got offered a record deal, which we blew, obviously.
How did you blow it?
By being greedy, by just wanting more. And the offer we received was so amazing, but we wanted more. It was stupid behavior. And this, so anyway, my jingles friend, I said to him one day, I wish I could figure how all this gear works, because my guitar sounds terrible. And if I knew how all the gear worked, I could make it sound great. And he said, well, it's funny you should say that, because I've just bought a building, and maybe you can build a studio for me, which was the strangest thing for someone to say. And we came up with a idea of a deal, which was he would give me a pot of money and exactly 1 year, and I had to build a studio and get it working in that time frame.
And I presume you knew nothing about building a studio at that point.
Less than nothing. I knew nothing about any of it. I knew how Revox worked, and I knew how to play the guitar, not particularly well to this day. And so in that year, I had £15,000 to build a studio and feed myself, because by that time I'd left home. And I had to leave my job. So I did it somehow.
How did you do it though? Did you find, did you have some form of mentor or find anybody that knew
I had
anything?
nothing, absolutely nothing. I didn't know anyone. So what did I do? I found cheap gear. I found secondhand dealers, and basically bought rubbish gear and then wired it. And the way I wired it was so bad, but I didn't know any better. I bought the cheapest cable, because I thought all cable, it's cabled, that will do, and concreted it in to the floor instead of ducting, and no acoustics, and rubbish speakers, and a multi-track 16-track that didn't work properly, and a console that didn't do anything, and a couple of bits of outboard gear, and a few literally hopeless, and had to do a session 1 year later.
With whom?
It was Jingle. hover over from Dover with sea speed, since you ask. And it
Well,
was
your
like
memory's good.
yeah, well, I'll never forget that. It was like a 5-piece band and a 3-hour session, my first session. And I'd sort of figured enough to be able to hit record and plug microphones in. And anyway, I got through it, and it was uphill from then. And ironically, I don't know what happened, but the studio started doing well. It did well enough for us to be able to lease some equipment. And
Oh,
then
wow.
we got a better tape machine and a better console and another on and on. It did really well.
It just shows you how, when you can take those opportunities, that they can turn into something immense. I want to go one step back and then come back to this. But one thing I remember from my teenage years was the representation of what pop stars sometimes meant. I'm of the era where I was a teenager in the early 70s. And for me, David Bowie was everything. He represented the other, the outsider. He represented me getting away from my parents into a world I wanted to be, where I wanted to be, which was sort of David Bowie's world. Did you have that with the Kinks or with any band where it represented something more than just the music?
No. And I realized, looking back, it was never really about the artist. It was about the record. So on occasion, when I've had conversations with people about who's your favorite artist or whatever, on occasion I've thought, well, actually, I don't really have a favorite artist. I have favorite records. And maybe as a kid, it was that. Having said that, I used to go to loads of gigs. I went to this school in the middle of London, and boarding. I was boarding, and it doesn't matter how it happened, but every night during the week, I'd sneak out and go to the Marquee Club, well, as often as possible, and saw all sorts of bands there from 13 onwards, which was extraordinary. And then at the weekends, we go to the Lyceum for all-nighters, and the Roundhouse, I think it was called Implosion. So it was gigs all the time. And then when not at gigs or not at school, I'd be playing in my bedroom band. So it was sort of all consuming, but not in a, it didn't seem like a career. It wasn't that. It was just, I loved it. I loved the music. I loved the records, the people that I was involved with. To this day, actually, I find people in music more. I'm more in sync with them than people who aren't. I suppose I don't know why or how, but it seems to be the case. Conversation's easier.
I find it fascinating that you say that it wasn't the artist, that it was really about the music piece, and so
I think so. Yeah.
So what was it about the Kinks? You really got me.
I could play it.
Yeah.
It was just dead simple. And they went do 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 do. It went up a tone. It was all really easy. That was it. Of course, I loved the records. Funnily enough, I met and got to know very well Shel Talmy, who was their producer, and the Who, and a few other people besides, obviously. And just purely coincidentally, I got to know him very well. He used to stay in my house a lot.
So later on, when you've built this studio and it's starting to, let's say, have a little bit of success in the sense that you can buy new equipment and you can build any more, how did you then, if I can sort of term it this way, how did you slide into production?
Well, I didn't know what any of it meant. And at the studio, this group came in. This was really early on, called Sniff and the Tears. And they came in with
Driver's seat?
Yeah,
amazing track. Yeah, I love that
yeah.
track.
So that album, they came in with a guy called Barry Farmer, who was called Bazza, who was from a studio. I forget the name. It was a really, really successful little 8-track studio where Stiff Records and Chiswick Records, not Gateway, I can't remember the name, it'll come to me, used to do made loads of records and demos. But for some reason, they wanted to come to our studio, and Barry, he was pretty hands off, and I was sitting trying to, pretend I knew what I was doing, engineering, but I couldn't help but offer suggestions because I was a guitar player, really, and they had 2 guitar players, so I'd be endlessly offering up ideas, and after, they were sort of going along with my ideas. They were happy for me to do this, and when it came to Driver's Seat, that we were mixing it, and I discovered, God, I've said this before, it sounds so stupid, I discovered the mute button, because the guitars, they were playing riffs throughout the whole song, and I suddenly realized if I muted the riffs in where Paul Roberts was singing, it changed the whole perspective of the song. And it didn't happen by accident. I sort of thought it through, and then because I was a guitar player, I knew how to hit the mute button. It wasn't on the beat, it wasn't like 1, 2, 3, 4 mute. It was 3, 4, 1 mute. It was that was one riff, and the other riff happened in another place, and I could do it. I had the dexterity, the musical dexterity, to be able to mute these 2 guitars and open them at the right spot so they came in at the beginning of their riffs. And it was a magical moment because it suddenly changed this relentless thing into a format, and I ended up with or being told I had a production credit. And the other thing, which was another complete fluke, was putting a big reverb on the snare at the front, which I believe it was long before Start Me Up, which Bob Clearmountain did. He did the same trick. Well, it wasn't a trick, it was just something that happened, and it sounded great. So it became this sort of gymnastic mix, the mute button on the send, and then the mute buttons on the guitar, and other people riding stuff. Anyway, and that became a big hit. And I didn't realize I was producing records. I was doing whatever I'd always done, because in the bedroom it was, hey, why don't you try doing this, and I'll do this, and then let's put a harmony here, and so it was all the same stuff really, but didn't have a label. Then Paul Roberts said, would I produce a second Sniff and the Tears album? And I suddenly thought, oh, maybe that's what this is all about. Maybe that's what I'm doing here. I'm a record producer, well, kind of. And from that point on, even though that was a complete disaster, that album, because I didn't know what I was doing, I suppose that's what I became, even though I couldn't get any jobs. So I'd produce I'd make my own records and friends' records, and nothing happened until I got a call to work with Trevor Horn.
Now, you say that you didn't know what you were doing at that point with that second album. The thing is, you also sort of mentioned you didn't know what a producer was. So what did you learn from that process in terms of what a producer is? I mean, I can't define what a producer does. Maybe you can tell me what a producer actually does.
Who knows?
Yeah,
Who knows?
exactly.
I suppose the answer is deliver a record.
Right.
Maybe it's that broad. Deliver something that people want to hear, maybe. But even to this day, everything's changed, as we know, but maybe, I don't know, some records I've made, I've just been a therapist. Other records I've made, I've done everything. whatever it takes, really. And it is. I'm always amazed at people. I met Dr. Luke a long time ago at, when I was working at Psalm, and he was every day. He was in the next room to me, so I'd see him most days. And whenever I saw him, he was studying Billboard, and I realized to him, he made it very scientific. This record production, it was as much of a science as an art. All I've ever done is, do I like it? Yeah, I like it. Taste, really.
So do you go in with any preconceived ideas? I mean, I'll come on to Trevor Horn and we get onto that in a second, but in terms of going in, like if you're going to work with an artist, do you go and do all your research?
Well, it depends. I mean? It depends who it is.
Right.
Everyone's different. With, for example, Simple Minds, no, but Annie Lennox, yes. I had a very, very vague idea that I put to her before we started her first record, and that idea was the guitarist. You're no longer with the guitarist in the band, so let's not have any guitar. That was a pretty vague starting point.
So that was for her to get away from the sound with Dave Stewart, in a sense, to take her away. Yeah.
Well, or to look at it, to flip it on its head, for her to be her. Because she's a keyboard player. So not having guitar meant we were leaning more on keyboards. It didn't work out that way, but it doesn't really matter. It gave us a starting point.
Okay, I'll come back to Annie Lennox in a bit, but just to go to Trevor Horn, where was he in his life when you met him? Because he became...
I'll tell you exactly where he was. I think he'd done Yes, ABC, and he just started ZTT, and I don't know the timeline well enough, but I think The Art of Noise was something that had been going on while he was making these other records, Dut Rock, ABC. Don't think it had the Fairlight then. They might have, I'm not sure, but certainly 90125. They'd got samples from, Alan White or whatever. The Art of Noise consisted of the people who his team messing about.
So that was Paul Morley as well then?
Well, Paul Morley came up with the name. And once they had a name, it made sense of their messing about. And then Trevor could get involved in a I suppose as an editor more than anything, to make something out of what they'd done. I've probably got that wrong. And JJ or Anne or Gary will say, oh, no, it wasn't that at all. But that's the impression I got. And I remember I only had worked on one thing. It was probably Moments in Love, a remix. And it was just basically editing, loads of editing that we did.
What was his style of working and how did that correspond to who you were at that time?
Well, he had bigger budgets and much, much, much bigger ideas, and understood the importance of rhythm. And those three things, I remember being amazed at how much time he kept talking and thinking about the rhythm, which I'd never really done. I thought, oh, drums, yeah, we'd done the drums, but he would spend ages on thinking about what rhythm it should be and what the bass should be, and of course I've learned that from him also, because he had the ability to command big budgets. I'm not sure that that's relevant, but at any rate he had time. He could take his time and would do things which happen with Relax, start again. I'd never start again. I once you'd started, that was it. There wasn't the time or the money or the wherewithal to start again. But with Relax, we started again.
So he would literally say, this isn't working, we start from the beginning.
start from the beginning again. Yeah.
Wow. So tell me about working on Relax.
It was version 1, 2, 3 that I got involved in. I was asked to go and work for him for 2 days as an engineer, and I didn't want to do it. I knew Trevor because he played on jingles, and as I told you, my ex-partner used to make jingles, so I'd met him a load of times, and then he'd become this big hit producer, and I was sort of bitter and twisted about it because why not me? Usual nonsense. And so when I was asked to work for him for 2 days, I thought, I hate his records, hate them. I don't want to do this. It's all nonsense. And 2 days, I'll do 2 days, and I'm not going to pay any attention to him at all. And it transpired he loved the fact that I just got on with whatever I wanted to do, and loved the fact that I could play guitar.
So he was a person that gave people freedom within the...
That's what he does. In fact, another thing I learned, which is weird because I'd worked for years with a guy called Hugh Murphy, who I'd known. He'd produced my brother's band, so I knew him from childhood, really. And because I had a studio and I knew him, I called him and said, can you bring some work to the studio? And we had a great time, and we made half a dozen albums together. And he lent on me all the time. Not lent on me, but I could do whatever I wanted, play, suggest stuff to the musicians. And I remember thinking then, hey, he's not producing, he's just sitting here. But of course, in retrospect, he was amazing what he was doing. He was recognizing that there were people in the room with good ideas that he was going to use, which is what Trevor did, and hopefully what most producers, at any rate, old-fashioned producers do. They utilize people's skills.
Well, tell me about the guitar then, because he utilized that skill of yours, didn't he?
Yeah, I told him, I went everywhere with my guitar. It was just a guitar, with a pedal, no amps or anything. And so I had it in the control room. And after 2 days, we just kept going. And we were doing Relax. And then I think we were doing Ferry Cross the Mersey, and he'd gone for dinner. And I thought the middle eight or bridge or whatever the Americans call it needs a guitar. So I just plugged, he wasn't there, and I plugged my guitar and did a guitar part in the middle eight. And he came in and said, "What? Who played that guitar?" And I said, "I did." He said, "I didn't know you played guitar." And I said, "Yeah, I told you I play guitar." And he went, "Great, okay." Next day, or maybe I think it was whenever, with that knowledge, he said, "Look, we're going to start again on Relax." And so JJ operated the Fairlight, Andy Richards was playing keyboards, Trevor had a Linn drum, and I was playing guitar, and we just did it. He had a rhythm. I plugged my guitar in. Engineering was irrelevant, which it kind of always has been for me. And off we went, and we came up with that version in a couple of hours, probably, very quickly.
That's amazing. I mean, the way you describe it is describing in a very collaborative way, which is how I'm a screenwriter today, and the film industry is very collaborative. And that's something that sounds very collaborative there, but that's without the band, or without I don't know who the ultimate person with the say is in that situation. Is it the producer, or is it the band or the singer or whoever you're working with?
You're talking about Relax.
Well, in terms of Relax, I think then it's clearly Trevor Horn, isn't it? He's probably the ultimate say so. But it can be in other terms. It can be the artist who has let's say they have a much higher profile and much higher status, and they can demand to have what they want. So how do you deal in a situation where the artist has a different vision to what you want?
I'm trying to think of an example. There are many, but I need to think of one where I don't stick my head in a noose. They're just ways of dealing with things. You know, there was one record I made where I pieced the vocal together and the singer didn't like it at all and kept asking me to change it. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll change it tomorrow. Come tomorrow, I hadn't changed it. Have you changed it? No, I haven't changed it yet. And on and on. A week later, have you changed it? No, oh, completely forgot. Don't worry, I'll do it. And the, you know, asking whether I'd changed it became a weekly thing and then a monthly thing. And then the artist was resigned to the fact I wasn't going to change it. So in a way, I sort of wore them out with, but that's one example. Another example is I'll change it, you know, whatever you want. I think you're wrong, but I'll do it. Or have an argument or a discussion, you know, whatever. I can think of loads of times when the artist got their way and were right, and loads of times the artist got their way and they were wrong. And the same with me. In fact, with Annie, with Walking on Broken Glass, she came up with a part that I thought was wrong because there was a clash of notes. And I kept saying, you can't do that, it's clashing. And she said, but I like it. And I said, yeah, but it sounds wrong. And she kept going, but I like it. And then, you know, after toing and froing, I went, okay, you like it, we'll keep it. And of course, it's one of the hooks. So that another example, I suppose, was a record, Don't Stop Moving by S Club 7.
Oh, okay, I do know it. Yes.
Yeah, it was record of the year, this track, this song. And I had a thing about the vocoder. I hated the vocoder that goes, don't stop moving to the funky, funky beat. Don't stop moving to the S Club beat. I thought, this is so cheesy. It's got to go in the bin. We can't have it. And at the very last moment, while we were mixing, my engineer, Hef Moraes, who we worked together for years, I said, have you still got that vocoder? Yeah. Let's just hear it. And he unmuted it. And I went, God, we better put that in, hadn't we? And of course, that's the hook. And I was totally happy to throw it in the bin.
While you're working with Trevor, the track Slave to the Rhythm came in, I presume, because Frankie Goes to Hollywood, or Holly Johnson, recorded the vocal on that first, didn't he? And so what was the reaction to that? I listened to it today. It's on YouTube, actually.
Not very good, is it?
Well, to be fair on Holly, I mean, I've seen an interview with you where you said that his voice didn't work on it. But to be fair on him, the track felt a bit inadequate as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, big time. Yeah. But you know, they often tracks would. You need the vocal to get the thing going. It's chicken and egg, really. But it wasn't suited to them at all. Actually, it wasn't suited to Grace Jones either until it changed. That was what we ended up calling the German version. I don't know why we called it that. Very, very rigid, up-tempo, 4 on the floor version.
I mean, there's an amazing change between that Frankie Goes to Hollywood track and the Grace Jones version. So how did it get from that to Grace Jones?
Quite simple, actually. So that was Slave to the Rhythm. I think Trevor probably has, we've talked about this on occasion, has a different, he remembers things differently. But my take on it is Chris Blackwell loved the title because ZTT and Island Records were connected. I think they distributed ZTT. And so Chris Blackwell knew everything that was going on. Whatever he wanted to know, he heard about this he heard the title and said that would work really well for Grace Jones. And then he heard the track and thought it's the wrong rhythm. You should make it go-go for her. And I'll book some musicians that I know in Washington, and I'll get them over. We'll book a week at the power station in New York, and you guys go over and record the song, make it go-go. So Bruce Woolley, who was one of the writers, him and Simon Darlow, he said, okay, yes, I'll do a demo. And he did this demo. None of us knew what go-go was. And we get to New York with this demo, and the rhythm of it was, it went, I remember it pretty well. It went dung, ga dung, dung, like My Jamaican Guy. You know, that it was that sort of rhythm. And he'd sort of made the song work over that rhythm. And anyway, so the go-go band arrive, and we're setting them up in the studio in record, and push the faders up and hear the rhythm. And the three of us, it was Bruce, Trevor, and myself out at the power station, are going, oh my God, how are they going to play this demo? It's completely wrong. Anyway, we finished setting them up and play them a demo, and they're looking at us like we're mad. Can't play it. Have another attempt the following day. No, they went home. But we had this rhythm because the tape machine had been in record. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we looped a section of the drums where the guitar player had gone off to have a pee, drums and percussion. And we made this drum loop and wrote the song over that rhythm. But it's the rhythm. It's the rhythm of the record. That is a drum loop with a couple of bits here and there. It's a 2-bar loop.
I mean, that was part of an album.
But the album wasn't really an album. It was us trying to get a better version of that version with some incidental bullshit thrown in on the way. Like me demonstrating a piece of software, that's one track. Bruce messing about with the sequencer, that's another track. Jill Sinclair's brother reading from Jean-Paul Goude's book, that's another track. It was just stuff. And us messing about, really. And then it took so long to decide that the version we already had was the best version, that it had to be an album because of the amount of money it had cost. By which time she was out of contract anyway. So the whole thing was a bit of a catastrophe.
So that actually didn't get released straight away, did it? I don't think. That was it came later because of that.
It was released, I think the single was released on Island Manhattan ZTT. 3 record companies. So no one was prepared to promote it. So it didn't really do much. She had 1 TV show, I think, or 2 or whatever. No promotion.
But it's one of those tracks that's become one of the most memorable tracks in music, isn't it? It's one of those things that so many people cite as one of their favorite tracks. So it's had a life of its own after that.
Yeah, kind of. It's weird, isn't it?
Now, I saw an interview where you said that because you were at the power station, then Jim Steinman was in the other room, and then you sort of intimated that there were some crazy goings on. So it really intrigued me.
Oh, he asked us to go in and hear the song he was working on, and we didn't know anything about. I think we knew who he was because he'd done Total Eclipse of the Heart. I think. Had it? I'm not sure if Bad Out of Hell had happened. I don't know the timeline. But anyway, he was doing a Bonnie Tyler song, another one of these huge monolithic songs. And he said, come in at whatever time it was. He gave us a time to hear what he was doing, which in itself was weird because he didn't know us. And so we went in, and as we were at the door to the control room, we were handed lyric sheets, and he told us where to stand, the other side of the speakers, and he sang the song for us with his hand on the volume control. So the track was playing, and when in between his vocal, he jacked the volume up, you know, so it was monumentally loud, and then back down, then he'd do the next bit. And at the end, he looked at us, and you know, for affirmation of how great it was. And we were, I remember the three of us were sort of just bemused. I mean, generally, when you hear stuff the first time, I don't know about you, but I can't really go, oh, that's amazing, because I don't know what I'm hearing. I need to hear it a few times.
Yeah, no, I've been in the studio where artists are recording, and I've had, you know, they've asked me, and I just think, A, who am I? And B, it's too early. I can't
I can't
respond.
tell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think
so anyway.
it's funny to have that sort of dynamic when someone, it's almost like an ego thing where what do they want out of you when you're in there?
Yeah,
They must want confirmation in some way. But it's a great story. So what do you think? You know, I asked you about Trevor Horn and what you learned from him, but I think there is always the other way around. What do you think Trevor Horn gleaned from you over your time working with him?
Wow.
Gleaned from you over your time working with him?
Wow. Pass. You'd have to ask him. I have no idea. Probably nothing. But I don't know. I don't know. We sort of ended up co-producing, and it worked for a while, but then we trod on each other's toes, really. I think it's fair to say we ended up covering the same ground. I don't know what he my God, I don't know. He's got a book coming out. Maybe he'll say.
Yeah. No, but I always find it an interesting thing because people always talk about what they learned from other people, but they never really think about
No, that's
what they may
true.
have contributed. You know what I mean? And we all
Yeah.
contribute something. So I'm sure there is something there and something positive that he would have taken away from working with you. How does ownership work in these situations in a studio in terms of input of the various people? Because I think this is always a question, and it's always something that comes up, you know, when you think about bands and the problems they have about ownership and who's done what and who earns what and all this stuff. I just wondered how does it work within terms of a studio?
Do you mean publishing?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I mean,
well, I learned that was another thing I learned from Trevor. And not only Trevor, but it was kind of obvious. One has to be very circumspect about this, or not now. It seems that things have changed. You know, you come up with a beat, you get some of the publishing. But back then, and to me, always, if I fiddle around with the arrangement of something or chords or rhythm or what, that's not writing. Paul McCartney said to me that writing was lyrics and melody. I think he adheres to that very strictly. I think possibly a bit too strictly in my experience with him, but I know where he's coming from, and certainly the artists I've worked with, I wouldn't claim publishing unless I've written the music with them, you know, from the off. So Simple Minds, I think Simple Minds gave me publishing on 2 songs on Real Life. I would have, I don't know how they came up with that. I would have said all of them, but I would never argue with them about that. You know, it was Ronan Keating I wrote loads with, Will Young I wrote loads with, the girls from Propaganda I've just done an album with, wrote the whole thing with them. You know, loads of things I've written, but then with Annie, whatever input I might have had, it wasn't writing, for example.
Okay, well, let's talk about Annie. What input then do you feel you had with Annie. There, she's coming out of a massively successful band with Dave Stewart and going solo, and you've, you know, done your research on her and gone in and said, okay, you know, we should do this without the guitar, and she's a keyboardist, so we can concentrate on that. What at first, what was it like to work with Annie Lennox? And I can imagine that she's a very headstrong person. I've interviewed her in the past, but she you know, she's got a toughness about her that is really quite well, I find it quite cool, actually, that, you know, she knows what she wants. So how is it to work with someone who really sort of seems to know what they want?
Well, I made three, in effect, 4 albums with her. 3 albums, a load of live stuff and stuff for movies and a lot. And they've all been different. And I think to begin with, she was very unsure of herself and needed not cajoling, but confidence boosting, which I messed up when I first met her, but got past that. And then as things went on, and she became more secure as a solo artist, I think our level, we'd argue a lot. We argued a lot. Certainly on Medusa, we argued. Oh God, I'm saying this like, you know, it's a badge of honor. I'm not saying it. What I mean is her understanding of what she wanted to do increased. And then Bear, we sort of, we'd had enough because we would disagree on rubbish things, but in a way we become over familiar, and I was happy to disagree with her in a way you do with someone you're familiar with, as opposed to being circumspect, maybe. So I'm somewhat to blame in that department, but then she became more opinionated, and I didn't think she was right, whereas before she wouldn't have expressed those opinions. Do you see what I'm saying? So the whole sort of balance shifted, as happens with these kind of relationships.
I mean, in any creative work, there's going to be these differances come up, and they either get resolved in a way that both can agree, or they get resolved in a way that neither agrees, and then someone has to finally pull rank, I suppose. And
Yeah,
that's going to happen everywhere, isn't it?
yeah, but there is that thing about contracts. A good contract is one where neither party's happy. You know, someone once said that to me. In other words, compromise. But did we compromise? I'm just thinking. Well, actually, on Medusa, our compromise worked out pretty well, because there were 2 reggae songs. It was a covers album, and she wanted to cover 2 reggae songs, and I kept saying to her, "You're not a reggae artist. You know, reggae artists do reggae really well." And she began, "Yeah, but I love reggae." Great, listen to it then, but don't sing it. You know, we can't do reggae. And she was adamant she wanted to do reggae, and so we argued about this a lot, and then finally she said, I remember where we were. Anyway, she go, "Okay, you've sort of battered me into submission. We won't do them." And then because she did that, I said, "Oh God, look, why don't we do one of them? You know, we'll just do one, and I'll try and figure a way of doing it." And she, "Okay then." And then I came up with this way of doing a Bob Marley song called "Waiting in Vain," that wasn't reggae. And so it was a sort of compromise in a way, but in another way, it worked out quite well, that we didn't end up with reggae, but we did a reggae song in an interesting way. So the argument had, there was fruit from the argument, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's there's always, there can always be a positive side to an argument if it's done in a constructive way. In terms of an artist, when an artist comes in, and someone like Annie Lennox has this amazing voice, I mean, it's just stunning, her voice. And is someone like that protective of their voice? If you see what I mean, they know how their voice works. They know what they want, how they want to sound, and how they want to express and sing something. How difficult is it to challenge that idea?
I think with her, it was always the same process. We'd do a vocal. Look, my thing about doing vocals is not making a big deal of them. Just do them. Just sing a song. It's not right. Now we're going to do the vocals, none of that. Just sing it. So she'd go out to the vocal booth or wherever, and she'd start, and then she'd say, stop, let me drop in there. Let me go in on the fourth line. So she would conduct herself, and Hef would keep everything. So we'd have an empty multi-track, and everything she sang, we kept. And so she'd be doing this, and then she'd go, all right, now let me go through it again. She'd go through it again. And I might then say to her, Annie, just do it again, but why don't you sing it quieter? Okay, because she was happy now. She had what she wanted. And I was saying, just give me some other stuff. And then I'd give her broad input, which I would like to think is the case with all singers. I hate the idea of, look, line 3, that third word, can you just, it starts getting a little bit painful. I'd rather fix it later than put the singer through the ringer, as it were.
I mean, you mentioned about sort of saying that, maybe sing that a bit softer or on a different type, different tonal level. There's that song, The Downtown Lights by the Blue Nile.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? Because that was that case, wasn't it?
Actually that, but also Waiting in Vain. Because Waiting in Vain, I don't want to wait in vain for your love. I don't want to wait in vain for you. I don't want to wait. I think she says it 3 times. And I said to her that we'd got the vocal, and I said, this section, it's sounding a bit boring. I think what you should do is pretend you're in a pressure cooker and it's coming to the boil. So the first line is not, you're sort of in there and you're singing it. And the second line, the pressure's slightly greater. You're not necessarily much louder, but there's a sort of thing where your blood pressure's gone up, And the third one, it's like full on blood pressure, but you're not yelling. You're just, the veins are coming out on your forehead. Try that. So she did that, and it worked really well. So that's an example of input. It wasn't, so it was kind of vague and a bit strange input, really, like sing like you're in a pressure cooker. But Downtown Lights was another thing, because it was very hard to put that song together in the first place. It took over a week to get a thing from beginning to end. I had a rhythm, and I couldn't figure the chords. And funny enough, I know Paul Buchanan quite well, and talking to him, it felt like nobody had actually played the song. It's as if they had a sound. They played one note and then played another note, and then and it was all disparate notes that made this patchwork quilt of harmonic content, rather than someone playing the chords, which he sort of acknowledged. Anyway, that's how it felt to me, and I had to put it together for her to have something to sing to. And it's quite complicated, the song, the timing of the vocal. Trevor was doing a version with Rod Stewart at the same time. And he said Rod couldn't get the timing at all. He just sang it, and I adjusted the track to Rod. But Annie, the way we did it was line by line. So she said, I played a track. Yeah, I can sing to that. Okay, let me learn the first couple of lines. And she went into the booth and we started it, and she sang the first two lines, and Hef stopped the tape machine, and the three of us spontaneously burst into floods of tears. It was the weirdest moment, because it sounded so great and had taken so long to get to this point, and she sang it. It was just amazing. And of course, it points out something very interesting, which is that those artists who have what we call soul, they don't really have soul at all. They just do it. And what they're doing intrinsically has soul. It's not, if I think of, I worked with Jeff Beck, made an album with him. He might as well be reading a newspaper while he's doing this stuff. And it's unbelievable what he's doing. And if you don't look, it's like he's bleeding the guitar. But in fact, he's just doing what he does. Bonnie Raitt, that she sings a song called I Can't Make You Love Me. And I might be wrong here, but it sounds to me like she's reading the lyrics, but it comes across like the most moving vocal you've ever heard. And it's only moving because she does what she does. And that's what happened with Downtown Lights. Annie sang the first two lines. She wasn't going, there was not any heartfelt goings on. It was, all right, I think I've got the melody. All right, let's go. And she did it, and it just sounded extraordinary. And I think that accounts for most great artists. They just do it. There's no yearning going on. They're just doing what they do. And that's what happened with that.
But there is some sort of innate connection between the listener and the artist through their voice, through the music, and through all those things, isn't there? Completely. And it's a beautiful thing.
But it's not, I don't think it's a conscious thing. That I've been in the room where people have said to the singer, look, do it with more, passion in that. And it always sounds terrible, just do it. I always think just do it. That's how you're going to get a good vocal or a good solo or good anything. Just do it. And if just doing it isn't good enough, you're not good enough, because you're not an actor here. It's not acting. It's just doing.
So you talked about McCartney earlier, or you mentioned McCartney earlier. What sort of remit do you get when you work with someone who's got that legacy? There probably is no greater legacy in the world from a living artist than McCartney. So how do you, in a sense, contribute to someone with that sort of massive legacy? How does that operate?
Well, I think it's the same with anyone who's what's the word? Successful, big time. I don't know, whatever you call it. You can't think about that. And for sure, McCartney wanted Trevor or Trevor's team or us or whatever it was, because he wanted what we did. So there wasn't much of a question of that. That's what he wanted. So we didn't go there going, what do you want? We went there going, well, this is what we do, because that's what he wanted us to do, what we do. Of course, it got reined in because he has an opinion and an approach. So the whole thing, it kind of worked on one song really well.
What song was that?
It's called Rough Ride.
Okay. Why did it work well? Tell me.
It was the first thing we did. And I don't know why. Why did it work well? Trevor, I set up in the control room. I had all this gear. I just bought a whole bunch of computers and synthesizers, and as I was setting out, Trevor said, I'll pop upstairs with Macca and see what he's got. And he came down and said, found a song that will work with I had a drum box and I'd programmed this rhythm in it. And he said, it'll work with that rhythm you programmed. I went, oh, okay. And I found the rhythm, played it. And Macca goes, "Oh yeah, we'll work with that." So I had the drum box. He picked up a guitar, and involuntarily, I started playing the bass on a keyboard. Not that I'm a great keyboard player, but I had this amazing bass sound I'd sort of created, set it up. Trevor had a keyboard. So Macca's playing guitar, Trevor's playing keyboard, I'm playing bass and rhythm. And we just kept going through the song and it sounded good. Sounded really good. Empty, but quirky and enjoyable. And I think all that came out. There were loads of details that happened. It's boring, but I thought it worked well, that one. Have you heard it?
Yes, I have actually. Yeah, I mean that was it's in Flowers in the Dirt, wasn't it?
Flowers in the Dirt.
Yeah, yeah. And before we go on with the interview with Stephen Lipson, please subscribe to the channel, because every time I upload a new video, then you'll be the first to hear. Now, stick with it, because we're going to hear more about his career, and particularly about the film scores and Hans Zimmer. You've sort of transitioned into film, in the last years. What is the difference in terms of producing music for a film than actually, than producing records? What do you have to think about that is different?
In a way, it's the complete opposite, in a way, because with records, there's a structure and there are sounds that people tend to use. And it's very important that it pops out. It's got to be, you're competing with other music that's compressed and hard and bright. And whereas with film, you're serving the vocal is the dialogue, and the structure is determined by the picture. And what was the other thing? It's sort of, and so the sound can't get in the way of anything. You've got sound effects and dialogue to deal with. So I completely messed up the first thing I was asked to do, which was The Dark Knight Rises. I for some reason, Hans Zimmer asked me to mix his score for The Dark Knight Rises, and mixing, I never considered myself to be a mixer as such. I mixed all my own records, but that was just because that was the end of making a record. It wasn't because I was a mixer. And he asked me to do it, and I said to him, I'm confident in my ignorance. So I took up the challenge and messed it up completely, because I mixed it like a record. I made the top line of the music too loud, and it was all too hard and bright. And Chris Nolan rejected everything I did for what they call the first reel. It was about 20 minutes of music I'd mixed, and he rejected the whole lot. It was explained to me what I'd done wrong. And from that point on, I started learning. I lost that sort of stupid know-it-all approach to things that maybe we all have at some point. I thought I knew what I was doing, and that taught me that I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I had to learn very quickly how to transition from records to film.
So Hans Zimmer, had you met him through Trevor because of the bubbles and
I met him in 1984 at Psalm East. He appeared and we had a laugh. I was kind of jokingly rude to him, and I have this thing. I don't know if it's true. You'll have an opinion, I'm sure, on this. I always think the first 5 seconds, which is a bit of a generalization, but the first 5 seconds when you meet someone, you're setting out your stall of how your relationship is going to be. That moment when you meet them is the moment that determines, to a large extent, how your relationship with someone will be. If you're you're forever going to be a bit like that. If you're on a level with them straight off, you'll probably be on a level with them forevermore. I don't know if it's true. It's just a thing that has stayed with me. And with Hans, when I met him, I made a jokingly disparaging remark about something. The first time I met him, he was just a jobbing session musician at the time. And because of that, our relationship has always been, even though he's Hans Zimmer, and I have inordinate respect for him, but I don't feel the need to kowtow or not tell him how I feel. Whereas most people in his orbit are very circumspect with their opinions. I don't feel the need to be. I can tell him stuff. Happy for him to ignore it. It's not a problem. But I feel I can say what I want to say to him. And he says he appreciates that.
I'm sure he does, because I think it's refreshing. I think a lot of people who are ultimately very, very, very successful end up having yes people around them, and it's a dangerous thing.
Very.
And that's always a really hard thing. Well, I just want to end with saying something that I feel, and that's, there are so many records that you've been involved on, from the Pet Shop Boys to Annie Lennox, to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, stuff that has meant so much in my life. I just want to thank you for your contribution to popular music that has really been something in my life and something very important. So,
that's
Stephen
nice.
Lipson, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. I hope I keep producing stuff you like.
Yeah, I hope you do as well. I love films, so there you go. Brilliant, Steve.
Great.
Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Okay,
right.
See you again.
Bye.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.